Good afternoon, everybody. My name is August Pfluger. I represent the 11th District of Texas, much of the Permian Basin, the most prolific oil and gas producing region in the country. And today we wanted to gather to talk about energy security. Energy security is national security. Many people know that, and we're trying to make sure that the rest of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle can join us in doing the right thing for our country. The U.S. was energy dominant. At the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, we produced more oil and gas and exported more than we imported. And we need to get back to that structure. Unfortunately, at the beginning of the Biden administration, this country has received an all-out assault on our own domestic energy production. Just a couple of weeks ago, I traveled to Ukraine and had the opportunity to talk with President Zelensky. The scenes that we see right now are absolutely horrifying. The tragedy, the war-torn country, the amount of refugees that are fleeing the country, the aggressive nature of Vladimir Putin, and the war crimes that we're quite frankly witnessing on an hourly basis. President Zelensky told me the importance of energy security. He talked about the importance of the Nord Stream pipeline for Putin, for the leverage and the power that it gave Vladimir Putin and the impetus that it served to provoke this invasion. For months, the Ukraine has been asking for sanctions on the Nord Stream pipeline. They've been asking for us to cut off the imports of Russian oil and gas because of the money that it was putting into Vladimir Putin's pockets, building up reserves that are now serving to fund his war, the unjust war against Ukraine. What President Zelensky told me directly was that not only does energy security matter, but it is the reason that he believes that Vladimir Putin has the ability to now invade. Unfortunately, our president has turned his back on our own energy security. Today, President Biden rightfully made a decision to ban Russian oil imports, and that's great. But it's not the most important step that needs to happen. The most important step that needs to happen is we need to unleash American production, U.S. production of oil and gas, our own energy that we have right here, the capacity that we have. We need a plan from the White House. That plan needs to be focused on our own energy security. President Biden, you need to put Midland over Moscow. You need to make sure that our own domestic production will serve not only our needs, but that of our partners and our allies. Today, the president is traveling to Texas. And in addition to his pre-planned meetings, I would hope that he would meet with oil and gas executives, that he would ask them what it would take to immediately start producing, to immediately relieve the pressure on our own infrastructure. The Permian Basin is a strategic tool that nobody else has. And there are many of those areas throughout the United States, such as the Marcellus, the Bakken, the Eagle Ford, and many other producing regions. I wish that the president's first phone call would have been to the mayor of Midland, Texas, and not to Maduro of Venezuela. The United States of America should not be energy dependent. We should be energy dominant. We should not rely on our adversaries for our own energy needs. Enough is enough. We need President Biden to put Midland over Moscow. Today, the president has the capacity and the capability to approve 6 projects right here in the United States, 6 LNG projects. And he could increase right this second our capacity to produce LNG, to export LNG by 20% with those 6 projects, some along the Gulf Coast and some in other areas. It's time to put our own domestic production to use. It's time to stop funding terrorists and stop calling OPEC, Iran, Venezuela, or other areas for our own needs. With that, I'd like to introduce the whip of the Republican Party, Representative Steve Scalise.
Thank you, August. Most Americans know what the problem is right now. We all want to help Ukraine maintain their independence. We all support and stand with the people of Ukraine as they battle against Putin's forces. But just like the people in Ukraine know, people here in America know that it's American dollars and European dollars that have been helping finance Putin's war because Joe Biden turned off the spigots in the United States when he became president. Those decisions are having devastating consequences. And rather than looking in the mirror and acknowledging what he did, President Biden wants to continue to double down on his anti-American energy strategy. It's failed the American people. It's enabling Putin to finance his war. And right now, what is President Biden talking about? He might finally be coming around to banning Russian oil. But the problem is, he wants to replace it by begging other dictators to replace the oil that Putin was providing, when the answer is right underneath our feet. It's right here in America. There is no safer and more environmentally sound way to produce energy than in the United States of America. He likes talking about carbon emissions, but we emit more carbon if you make oil in Russia or Iran or Venezuela versus making it in the United States of America. He won't answer that question. What he has against American energy. And it makes our country less secure, and it funds dictators around the world. Why he picks up the phone and calls dictators instead of picking up the phone and calling energy companies and here in America and saying, let's produce our own. Let's green light pipelines that safely transport oil throughout the United States, that would safely transport Canadian oil into the United States rather than bringing tankers of Russian oil. These are the decisions that are having devastating consequences. And again, Putin was making $700 million a day selling his oil to the United States and Europe. And so while you get rid of Russian oil, you don't send that $700 million to other dictators around the world. Keep the $700 million here in America every single day. Create those jobs here. There's no doubt why Americans today are paying the highest price for a gallon of gasoline in the history of the United States. Over $4 a gallon. It's because of Joe Biden's anti-American strategy. His anti-American energy strategy. We here, as members of the Republican Study Committee, are calling on Joe Biden to reverse his anti-American energy strategy. Stop calling foreign dictators for oil and utilize the great resources of the United States of America to produce low-cost, high-security energy. With that, I'm going to bring up the ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee, Bruce Westerman.
Thank you, Whip. I'm Bruce Westerman from Arkansas's 4th District. I want to say thank you to Chairman Banks and his leadership with the Republican Study Committee. The Republican Study Committee has always been a voice of reason and common sense, and we need reason and common sense right now. This administration, the left, has planted these seeds of an energy crisis, and they've grown, and we're experiencing the fruit of that right now. We were in an energy crisis long before Putin invaded Ukraine. Gas prices were continuing to increase, energy prices were increasing, domestic production was decreasing. The unfortunate events of Putin invading Ukraine have brought that, I think, to a head, and it's getting more media attention right now. But we need solutions. We need to fix a problem instead of making the problem worse. And we have the resources, we have the technology and the innovation here in America to fix those problems. We can supply our allies with energy. We can supply our own energy needs, but we can't do it when we have an administration that's locking up resources on our federal lands, when they hate fossil fuels and they're trying to block not just production on federal lands and federal waters, but on private lands and private water or private ownerships. When they're putting policies in place that create uncertainty so that investors won't invest in energy anymore. That's why Representative McMorris Rogers, the ranking member on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and myself filed a bill called the American Energy Independence from Russia Act. It unlocks the potential that we have so that we can provide our energy needs here at home, plus produce the cleanest, safest, most reliable energy to send to our allies around the world. And it needs to be all kinds of energy. There seems to be an attack on nuclear energy here. There's an attack on fossil fuels. Somebody got the bad idea that if it's not wind or solar, it's bad. But we need all forms of energy. If we could increase nuclear power production, that would provide us more clean natural gas to send to our allies. So it needs to be an all-of-the-above strategy, and it needs to be a strategy that promotes domestic energy, domestic production, And those are the kind of strategies that RSC supports, that these members that are here with me today support, and it's the kind of policy that our country should put in place to have the most reliable, the most affordable, and the cleanest energy on earth. And we can get there if we'll have the will to do it. Speaking of the chairman of the Republican Study Committee, I want to now invite him to the podium, Representative Jim Banks from Indiana.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for joining us here today. I first want to thank August Pfluger for his leadership on these issues. It was his work that brought us together today to talk about important legislation that he's introduced. Whip Scalise, Ranking Member Westerman, Ranking Member Kathy McMorris Rogers, to the rest of our leading members from the Republican Study Committee, thank you for joining us today. The Republican Study Committee must and will continue to lean in to this effort to support American energy workers and consumers around the country, because Americans are hurting. And because Putin is afraid of America's energy industry. He called it the great threat to Russia. He called America's energy industry the great threat to Russia. Putin knows that an energy strategy that puts America first puts Russia last. That's why we must put Midland over Moscow. Now today, Joe Biden actually did something good. It just took him several weeks to get there, and prodding from Nancy Pelosi and members of his own party to push him to do the right thing. He banned Russian oil imports. But Joe Biden is still attacking American energy and doubling down on the Green New Deal radical agenda. It will continue to send gas prices sky high. I can tell you I'm hearing from Hoosiers all over my great state about how much more they're paying for gas and energy costs. Right now, Hoosiers are paying over $4 a gallon at the pump, and it's only getting worse. Oil prices have already risen 60% before Putin's invasion. So let me tell you, unless the Biden administration changes its tune at home, things are going to get a whole lot worse for American consumers and for the rest of the world. This week, we learned that Joe Biden hasn't just put Moscow ahead of Midland. Joe Biden plans to put terrorists ahead of Texas, before Texas. We need oil and gas, but instead of producing it cleaner and cheaper here, instead of creating more American jobs, the Biden administration plans to turn to Iran. That's why today I introduced the No Oil for Terrorists Act to ban Iranian oil. But the Biden administration plans as well to buy oil from Venezuela, too. Democrats' plan is to crack down on one bad guy by enriching two other bad guys. It's insane. It doesn't make sense. Apparently, to Democrats and Joe Biden, anywhere is better than the United States of America. This is the result of a White House that always puts America last. It means putting dictators first. And it means fewer jobs and a higher cost of living for hardworking American families. Joe Biden intentionally weakened America's energy industry, and that has destabilized the entire world. It isn't pretty. But with that, I'd like to turn to my friend, one of our great leaders in the Republican Conference and in the Republican Study Committee, the ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Kathy McMorris Rogers.
Thank you, Chairman. A big thank you to August Pfluger and RSC Chairman Jim Banks and everyone for being here today. Energy security is national security. We need energy for everything that we do. You cannot be a diplomatic power without being a military power. You cannot be a military power without being an economic power. And energy is foundational to all of that. This morning, the Republicans continue to echo what we did on day one of this administration. When the Biden administration chose to cancel the Keystone Pipeline, on day one, canceling this pipeline that would have allowed us to import from Canada, our neighbor, our friend to the north, rather than being dependent upon Russia. And in fact, Russian imports have doubled in the last year under this administration. Congressman Bruce Westerman, the lead Republican on the Resources Committee, mentioned that we've introduced legislation that was blocked last week by the Democrat majority, but we're going to continue to press it, the American Energy Independence from Russia Act. This legislation would require that the administration first submit a plan as to energy security, which has to be at the forefront. It also means that we would say yes to more pipelines in North America, yes to the Keystone Pipeline. We would lift the restrictions on exporting LNG from the United States. Europe currently gets 40% of its natural gas from Russia. We should be giving them a choice where they could be receiving LNG from the United States. We need to start the leasing on federal lands. This is how we shut down Putin's war chest. This is how we stand by Ukraine and protect our national security and create jobs here in America. As others have mentioned, Americans are now suffering under the highest gas prices ever. It's driving up the cost of everything we do. It's estimated that it's a $1,300 per year increase for every American. So I join Congressman Pfluger. I think he got it right. The president needs to be prioritizing energy production in Midland, not Moscow, not Iran, not Saudi Arabia, not any other authoritarian regime. We have the resources, we have the ingenuity, we have the creativity, we have the jobs right here in America. So instead of considering a trip to Saudi Arabia, I suggest the president go visit the Permian Basin or the Bakken region in Montana and North Dakota. And we certainly shouldn't be looking to OPEC to bail us out of this mess. American workers are eager to produce a lot more energy right here at home. It's time to flip the switch on American energy. And the president could do this and unleash American energy, unleash jobs, bring down the cost of gas, and push, and that would be the greatest resistance to President Putin that we could do, and stand by Ukraine. So with that, is Jody here? I was going to introduce. Okay, well then I'll introduce a star from New Mexico, Yvette Harrell.
Star.
Yes.
Well, there's that. Yeah. Well, okay. First off, let me be very, very clear. Midland, over Moscow. We've talked about Texas. Let's just remember, everybody, New Mexico has two of the largest oil-producing counties in the nation. So I don't want to get left out. I'm not sure if this shouldn't say New Mexico over Moscow, just a suggestion. But you can tell we're all on the same team here. And why it matters is because the American people are getting it. They understand these are failed policies that are causing them to pay more at the pump. This isn't about energy independence anymore. It's about placing the problems of this White House and this administration square on the backs of the American people. It's awful. And I could stand up here forever, and I could, because we could talk about energy and we can talk about the border and masks and we can talk about supply chains. But right now, the best thing we can do for the American people and for our allies around the world is to tap into our energy resources. And not only will this put Putin at a standstill, it will also create an opportunity for this administration to shine. The other day, our president had a chance to be a hero or a zero at the State of the Union. Guess what? He was a zero when it came to energy policies, because our American people deserve better. We deserve energy that is made at home, that is more affordable, that is cheaper, that is cleaner. And with all this uncertainty around the globe, can't we for a minute think about the American people first? Can't we for a minute think about the communities, the investors, the jobs, the budgets, the national security that really is an effect of our energy independence? And it is a sad day that while this president has taken, and I will say, one half of a baby step to shut off purchasing Russian oil, don't wait for the other shoe to drop. Just be the man you were elected to be and go ahead and open up energy independence in America. That's what we need to do, and that's why we've introduced the American Energy Security and Transparency Act. We're compelling this administration to stop with withholding these permits on leasing, on federal lands. We're asking the Department of Interior to have at least 4 sales a year in 6 different states so that we can bring stability back to the industry, so we can give our industry producers the stability they need. The communities, they'll have that stability as well. It is time we put, how about this, Americans over Moscow. Let's get the job done and let's bring America back to energy independence. And thank you for being here today. And with that, I'm going to introduce my great friend, Garrett Graves.
Thank you.
You just didn't know what I was going to say. I have so many friends.
And I didn't know you were going to introduce me. Hey, Garrett Graves from Louisiana. Many folks have expressed shock and surprise by what's happening today. Expressed shock that energy prices are skyrocketing like they are, that they're having such an impact that just transcends the American economy. People are expressing shock that they've suddenly learned that we're so dependent upon Russian energy and energy from other countries that don't share America's values. It is absolutely incredible to me that people are expressing that type of reaction. Leaders here, Bruce Westerman from the Natural Resources Committee, August Pfluger, Kathy McMorris-Rogers, and others. We have been predicting, we have been saying, we have been calling for this exact scenario. Not for weeks or months, but for years. We've offered amendments to say that if gas prices exceed $4 a gallon, then this can't happen. Then you've got to produce domestically. We've said you cannot implement this legislation if it's going to cause a greater increase on dependence on energy from Russia, from China, or other countries. All of this has been predicted, and I'll tell you who's opposed our efforts every single time. It's been Democrats. This isn't political. That's just a fact. They're the ones who have opposed these efforts, not for weeks, not for days, not for months, but for years. We've been offering up these types of amendments, these types of policy solutions. I want to remind you, the last time that Ukraine was invaded was during President Obama's time. You know what else was going on at the same time? Another coincidence was that we had reached peak dependence upon Russian energy. Vladimir Putin knew in 2014 that he had us. He had leverage over us because we were so dependent upon them for energy, and he invaded Crimea. Now, once again, increasing our dependence, nearly tripling our crude oil imports from Russia last year. They knew that they had us again. And so none of this should have been a shock or surprise to anybody. History's going to repeat itself, especially if we keep making the same stupid mistakes that we made and should have learned from years ago. Now, I'll say it again, people expressing shock and surprise. Do you know that in the president's budget request to the Congress, there's an explicit provision in there that says that they won't make investments that result in a reduction of the cost of oil and gas? Let me say that again. In the president's budget request to the Congress, there's a provision in there that says they will not make investments in projects that result in a reduction in the cost of oil and gas. Congressman Scalise and I have been fighting this since we first saw it. Let me translate it another way. We want higher energy prices. They've clearly succeeded in that objective. Coming out of 2019 and 2020, we were at a point to where we were energy independent. We were energy secure in the United States. This own Biden administration's documents under the EIA, they showed that you are going to have a surge in global energy demand. You've heard the members talk about, if we're going to have a surge in energy demand globally, why not produce it from the place that does it cleanest? I'll give you another shocking fact, shocking because people aren't paying attention to facts or science. Under the previous administration, we reduced emissions on average 2.5% a year. Reduced emissions. How many of you think that under President Biden's administration last year, we reduced them even more? They actually went up 6.3% last year. There's not a strategy for energy out of this administration. It's higher prices, it's energy insecurity, and it's higher emissions. You're not achieving any objective that makes any sense whatsoever. They came out of the gates with an executive order banning additional leasing on public lands and waters in the United States, again, off the coast of Louisiana, where Congressman Scalise and I represent, giving our people pink slips in effect, yet employing more and more people in places like Algeria, in places like, obviously, Russia, in places like Saudi Arabia. Shame on us for repeating these same mistakes of the past. They came out and under the Build Back Better Act. Do you know that they imposed severance taxes on energy? They imposed up to a $10,000 a mile a year fee on pipelines. They increased royalty rates. Who's surprised that this is happening right now? This was entirely part of their plan. And now, as Congressman Scalise said, the highest gasoline prices in American history. The problems that they're causing within American families across our country right now, people calling our office telling us they can't even afford to refill their gas tanks to get to work. This is appalling. It was preventable. We have 38 billion barrels of technically proven reserves in the United States. 38 billion barrels. But instead, we're importing energy from Russia. And you've seen the latest, the administration's now going to talk to the Saudis, going to cut a cruddy deal with Iran, and they're in Venezuela negotiating with them. Going from bad to worse. I'll say it again, we have the reserves here, and this is preventable. No leasing, no exploration and production. That's not an energy policy. That's completely flawed strategies. They're impacting Americans across the board. And unfortunately, while I commend the administration for coming out and putting a ban on Russian oil, we proposed bans on Russian oil dating back 3 years ago, and they have fought us. So now they're going to ban Russian oil without any opportunity, without a plan to backfill. It's like quitting your job without a plan to figure out how you're going to pay your rent, your car note, or get groceries. Doubling down on stupid. We have the ability to produce our own energy security in the United States, and shame on us for continuing to repeat the mistakes of the past.
I'd like to thank my colleagues for joining. Obviously, the leading experts in this conference, people who are passionate, not only represent the area, but also have the experience. So I think we have time for 2 or 3 questions.
Talked about the fact that there's no leasing going on in federal lands. There is leasing going on in federal lands. Energy production is happening on federal lands. There are a lot of permits that are being sat on by companies. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think the example I gave was there are 6 companies right now with export terminals that could increase the capacity, our export capacity, by 20% for LNG right this second. That does not include pipelines that are out there that are in existence that either FERC or DOE is sitting on and is not approving. And just several weeks ago, the president came out and placed another ban on federal lands, federal leasing, and permitting. And so the assault, the weaponization that's happening is coming directly from the White House. If we were along the Gulf Coast and along the eastern seaboard to approve these terminals, this is not new. These are increasing capacity for LNG terminal, LNG export facilities that are already in existence. It's just increasing that capacity for them, and the permitting is not happening. So this is the weaponization we've been talking about.
But the permitting is happening in certain
The permitting is being slowed down by a regulatory posture that is very aggressive against these companies, against the pipelines. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, this represents clearly inexperienced energy policy. Yes, there are 9,000 permits. A permit doesn't mean that a well is actually producing. It may be a dry hole. It may not be economic. It may be a stripper well. You may have challenges, as Congressman Pfluger talked about your ability to actually get it to market because the administration is opposing pipelines. So a permit doesn't necessarily just mean that folks are sitting on energy. In addition to that, I just ran through and you heard all of these people talk about the regulatory actions of this administration. They're talking about ESG objectives. They're limiting access to capital. They have put bans, including, again, in the offshore Gulf of Mexico, blocking the lease sales. All of these things are creating uncertainty. If you're an investor, are you going to go in and invest when you have this incredibly volatile time out there like we're seeing right now, where you don't know if prices are going to be $60 a barrel or $150 a barrel? The volatility and the flawed energy strategies by this administration are causing the problems we've had today. We've all offered amendments and solutions to fix these things, not in recent weeks, but over years' time. This is what inexperienced energy strategies look like.
If I can just add to that, the administration keeps putting this talking point out about 9,000 permits that are out there that are unused, and like Representative Graves said, there's a lot of reasons, and necessarily unused doesn't mean that it's or unproductive doesn't mean unused. Also, it's a lot more in the details than just having the permit. A lot of times you need a series of permits to go in and develop a field. There's 4,600 permits that this administration's sitting on, permits dating back to the Trump administration. And if this administration hasn't been clear about their war on fossil fuels, I don't know anything else that they've been clear on. The bottom line is there have been zero leases on federal waters under this administration. A judge in Louisiana said that the DOI had to do their job and do leases. They finally put one up for sale. It had a very high price on it, and then another judge stopped it, and the Biden DOJ wouldn't even appeal the ruling. So there's a big goose egg on how many leases this administration has approved. With prices at however much they are today, $120, $130 a barrel, if people could drill, they would be drilling. We have supply chain shortages and labor shortages that are affecting that too. So the president's spokesperson needs to understand the difference between a lease and a permit and what's really happening instead of just throwing out this number of 9,000 permits.
I'm Randy Weber from Texas 14th District. I am the upper Gulf Coast of Texas. We are those export ports that we all talked about, 7 of us. LNG, almost 90% of it comes out of our district. Congressman Dr. Brian Babin and myself have more pipelines in our districts than any other member in the state, probably, and we export a lot of fuel. I had lunch today with a guy that's probably the CEO of one of the biggest pipeline groups around, and he told me personally today that FERC is giving them HELL. He said that FERC has moved the goalpost so many times on their regulations, on the amount of CO2 that they can produce, either on the end coming out, I'm talking about in the refining end and the production end. They've got to comply with all of those regulatory, precepts, regulations, and they keep moving it. He said it makes it hard to do business. That's what we're talking about, a war on energy. America needs to be the leader in the world on energy, and we can do it.
Go ahead.
Democrats have used this as an opportunity to push for their clean energy investments. Do you expect that they're going to use this as a political method to push for those clean energy policies? And secondly, energy has been such a divisive topic. Do you think that there's a way, some people in the middle would maybe argue that we can invest in clean energy while we're trying to transition there. We still need to produce domestic energy to kind of bridge that gap. Would you guys support investing in both? Is there a way that you guys can do that? What are your responses?
Well, I think we are investing in both, and I would invite anybody to come out to the area of Texas that I represent with more wind in my congressional district than the entire state of California, to come out and see the natural gas that's produced. And yes, there's no question that this is going to continue to be a divisive topic, but let's just take it back to the very first step here. When you're considering Ukraine and you're considering this conflict that has everything to do with energy, they need energy, not renewable energy, not a specific type of energy. They need energy. And that's the weaponization that we've been talking about to the previous question. So, I think the hope is that the president has a second chance. And that second chance is, number one, step one, yes, ban Russian oil. But step two is more important. Step two is unleashing domestic energy sources right here. And sure, an all of the above approach is exactly what we need. The demand for energy will only increase, and we will continue to see a worldwide population that grows, that needs affordable, reliable energy, which we produce right here.
I ask one, obviously you have another poster up on stage about defense spending. Related to that, you guys are going to vote this week on an omnibus package, the appropriations bill. Much of that was negotiated prior to the Russian invasion into Ukraine, including the defense spending levels. So given what has happened in the last 2 weeks, what is your message, Whip Scalise and others who want to chime in as well, to the Biden administration about the defense spending levels Do they need to be increased? Is what is going to be presented in the omnibus sufficient for Republicans to support?
I'll defer to the whip on this one.
Yeah, and we've been pushing for months to get a full year defense spending bill, because to properly fund defense, to build back our military, Mike Rogers, the members of the House Armed Service Committee have laid it out, as well as the Appropriations Committee members, what is needed to properly defend this country prior to Ukraine. Obviously, with the invasion of Ukraine, you've seen President Zelensky make a specific list of requests, not just to the United States, but to a lot of other NATO allies. And all of our countries are coming together. That would be a supplemental. It wouldn't be coming out of the base defense spending bill, but it would be additional funding to help Ukraine get the tools they need to go defend their country, as they're doing so heroically. They've asked, by the way, months ago, they asked the Biden administration for surface-to-air missiles, for example. All the carpet bombing you've seen, the cluster bombs just destroying villages, killing thousands of people. If they would have had those surface-to-air missiles months ago when they asked President Biden and were told no, they would have been able to defend a lot of those cities and prevent a lot of those deaths. But in the meantime, we're going to continue to work to get them the tools they need. That would be something separate, whether it would all be included. Those decisions haven't been made. They're still packaging it all up together. But for a proper defense spending bill, those are heavily negotiated levels. And frankly, the Republicans who have been pushing for a properly funded defense were able to get that proper level of defense so that we can provide for our men and women in uniform to protect America and our allies.
Last question. Hi, Caitlin from Colorado Public Radio. Thank you all for being here and doing this. You guys have been talking a lot about unleashing sort of American energy. I'm curious, do you see an incentive for American companies to do that when currently with these high prices they are making a profit? And unlike you guys, they are beholden to their shareholders who want to see a profit, not necessarily to taxpayers who want the gas.
Well, I think when you consider the term Midland over Moscow, that's putting America first. It's putting American companies and the American populace first. So sure, they're looking at shareholders, but more importantly, there's 10 million people in this country that work in the oil and gas industry, that work in the energy industry, and those people with good paying jobs have the effect of making sure that not only do they have the ability to put food on the table, but that our economy continues to be strong. And I think it was said before by several people here that the most important tool that we have available to us is our economy. And the oil and gas sector, obviously the energy sector writ large, is a huge part of that. So I think when you see the increase in prices, over $4 for a gallon of gasoline, this was avoidable. This was completely avoidable. And the assault on this industry started on January 20th of last year with the cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline, the assault of the FERC and the other departments for certification and otherwise, and it continued on. And that assault has limited the ability for us to really unleash the capacity that we have. Thank you all for coming today. We appreciate it.
Good job, Good job.
Garrett's on fire, man.
Garrett, thank you.
St. Bernard over St. Petersburg.